And there had been the other old woman, the one who everyone said was a witch, and what had happened to her had made Tiffany very thoughtful. Anyway, she preferred the witches to the smug, handsome princes, and especially to the stupid, smirking princesses, who didn't have the sense of a beetle. They had lovely golden hair too, and Tiffany didn't. Her hair was brown, plain brown. Her mother called it chestnut or sometimes auburn, but Tiffany knew it was brown, 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 just like her eyes, brown as earth. And did the book have any adventures for people who had brown eyes and brown hair? No. No. It was the blonde people with blue eyes and the redheads with green eyes who got the stories. If you had brown hair, you were probably just a servant or a woodcutter or something, or a dairymaid. Well, that was not going to happen. Even if she was good at cheese, she couldn't be the prince, and she'd never be a princess, and she didn't want to be a woodcutter, so she'd be the witch and know things, just like Granny Aching. Who was Granny Aching? Said a voice. Who was Granny Aching? People would start asking that now, and the answer was, what Granny Aching was there. She was always there. It seemed that the lives of all the Achings revolved around Granny Aching. Down in the village, decisions were made, things were done, life went on, in the knowledge that in her old wheeled shepherding hut on the hills, Granny Aching was there watching. And she was the silence of the hills. Perhaps that's why she liked Tiffany in her awkward, hesitant way. Her older sisters chattered, and Granny didn't like noise. Tiffany didn't make noise when she was up at the hut. She just loved being there. She watched the buzzards and listened to the noise of the silence. It did have a noise up there. Sounds, voices, animal noises, floating up onto the downs somehow made the silence deep and complex. And Granny Aching wrapped this silence around herself and made room inside it for Tiffany. It was always too busy on the farm. There were a lot of people with a lot to do. There wasn't enough time for silence. There wasn't time for listening. But Granny Aching was silent and listened all the time. What? Said Tiffany, blinking. You just said Granny Aching listened to me all the time, said Miss Tick. Tiffany swallowed. I think my grandmother was slightly a witch, she said, with a touch of pride. Really? How do you know? Well, witches can curse people, right? Said Tiffany. So it is said, said Miss Tick diplomatically. Well, my father said Granny Aching cussed the sky blue, said Tiffany. Miss Tick coughed. Well, cussing isn't like genuine cursing. Cussing's more like dang and botheration and darned and drat, you know? Cursing is more on the lines of, I hope your nose explodes and your ears go flying away. I think Granny's cussing was a bit more than that, said Tiffany in a very definite voice, and she talked to her dogs. What kind of things did she say to them, said Miss Tick. Oh, things like, come by, and away to me, and that'll do, said Tiffany. They always did what she told them. But those are just sheepdog commands, said Miss Tick dismissively. That's not exactly witchcraft. Well, that still makes them familiars, doesn't it? Tiffany retorted, feeling annoyed. Witches have animals they can talk to, called familiars, like your toad there. I'm not familiar, said a voice from among the paper flowers. I'm just slightly presumptuous. And she knew about all kinds of herbs, Tiffany persisted. Granny Aching was going to be a witch, even if Tiffany had to argue all day. She could cure anything. My father said she could make a shepherd's pie stand up and bar. Tiffany lowered her voice. She could bring lambs back to life. You hardly ever saw Granny Aching indoors in the spring and summer. She spent most of the year sleeping in the old wheeled hut, which could be dragged across the downs after the flocks. But the first time Tiffany could remember seeing the old woman in the farmhouse, she was kneeling in front of the fire, putting a dead lamb in the big black oven. Tiffany had screamed and screamed, and Granny had gently picked her up, a little awkwardly, and sat her on her lap and shushed her and called her, "My little jegget," while on the floor, her sheepdogs, Thunder and Lightning, watched her in doggish amazement. Granny wasn't particularly at home around children, because they didn't bar. When Tiffany had stopped crying out of sheer lack of breath, Granny had put her down on the rug and opened the oven, and Tiffany had watched the lamb come alive again. When Tiffany got a little older, she found out that Jigget, meant 20 in Yan Tan Tethera, the ancient counting language of the shepherds. The older people still used it when they were counting things they thought of as special. She was Granny Aking's 20th grandchild. And when she was older, she also understood all about the warming oven, which never got more than, well, warm. Her mother would let the bread dough rise in it, and Ratbag, the cat, would sleep in it sometimes on the dough. It was just the place to revive a weak lamb that had been born on a snowy night and was near death from the cold. That was how it worked. No magic at all. But that time it had been magic, and it didn't stop being magic just because you found out how it was done. Good, but still not exactly witchcraft, said Miss Tick, breaking the spell again. Anyway, you don't have to have a witch ancestor to be a witch. It helps, of course, because of hereditary. You mean like having talents, said Tiffany, wrinkling her brow. Partly, I suppose, said Miss Tick, but I was thinking of pointy hats. For example, if you have a grandmother who can pass on her pointy hat to you, that saves a great deal of expense. They are incredibly hard to come by, especially ones strong enough to withstand falling farmhouses. Did Mrs. Aking have anything like that? I don't think so, said Tiffany. She hardly ever wore a hat except in the very cold weather. She wore an old grain sack as a sort of hood. Does that count? For the first time, Miss Tick looked a little less flinty. Possibly, she said. Do you have any brothers and sisters, Tiffany? I have 6 sisters, said Tiffany. I'm the youngest. Most of them don't live with us now. And then you weren't the baby anymore, because you had a dear little brother, said Miss Tick. The only boy too. That must have been a nice surprise. Suddenly, Tiffany found Miss Tick's faint smile slightly annoying. How do you know about my brother? She said. The smile faded. Miss Tick thought, this child is sharp. Just a guess, she said. No one likes admitting to spying. Are you using psychology on me? Said Tiffany hotly. I think you mean psychology, said Miss Tick. Whatever, said Tiffany. You think I don't like him because my parents make a fuss of him and spoil him, yes? Well, it did cross my mind, said Miss Tick, and gave up worrying about the spying. She was a witch, and that was all there was to it. I think it was the bit when you used him as bait for a slathering monster that gave me a hint, she added. He's just a nuisance, said Tiffany. He takes up my time and I'm always having to look after him, and he always wants sweets. Anyway, she continued, I had to think fast. Quite so, said Miss Tick. Granny Aking would have done something about monsters in our river, said Tiffany, ignoring that. Even if they are out of books. And she'd have done something about what happened to old Mrs. Snapperly, she added to herself. She'd have spoken up, and people would have listened. They always listened when Granny spoke up. Speak up for those who don't have voices, she always said. Good, said Miss Tick. So she should. Witches deal with things. You said the river was very shallow where Jenny leaped up, and the world looked blurred and shaky. Was there a susurrus? Tiffany beamed. Yes, there certainly was. Something bad is happening. Tiffany looked worried. Can I stop it? And now I'm slightly impressed, said Miss Tick. You said, can I stop it, not can anyone stop it, or can we stop it? That's good. You accept responsibility. That's a good start, and you keep a cool head. But no, you can't stop it. I wallop Jenny Greenteeth. Lucky hit, said Miss Tick. There may be worse than her on the way, believe me. I believe an incursion of major proportions is going to start here, and, clever though you are, my girl, you have as much chance as one of your lambs on a snowy night. You keep clear. I'll try to fetch help. What, from the Baron? Good gracious, no. He'd be no use at all. But he protects us, said Tiffany. That's what my mother says. Does he? Said Miss Tick. Who from? I mean, from whom? Well, from, attack, I suppose. From other barons, my father says. Has he got a big army? Well, he's got Sergeant Roberts, and Kevin, and Neville, and Trevor, said Tiffany. We all know them. They mostly guard the castle. Any of them got magical powers? Said Miss Tick. I saw Neville do card tricks once, said Tiffany. A wow at parties, but probably not much use even against something like Jenny, said Miss Tick. Are there no witches here at all? Tiffany hesitated. There was old Mrs. Snapperly, she said. Oh, yes. She'd lived all alone in a strange cottage, all right. Good name, said Miss Tick. Can't say I've heard of it before, though. Where is she? She died in the snow last winter, said Tiffany slowly. And now tell me what you're not telling me, said Miss Tick, sharp as a knife. She was begging, people think, but no one opened their doors to her, and it was a cold night, and she died. And she was a witch, was she? Everyone said she was a witch, said Tiffany. She really did not want to talk about this. No one in the villages around here wanted to talk about it. No one went near the ruins of the cottage in the woods either. You don't think so? Tiffany squirmed. You see, the Baron had a son called Roland. He was only 12, I think, and he went riding in the woods by himself last summer, and his dogs came back without him. Mrs. Snappily lived in those woods, said Miss Tick. Yes, and people think she killed him, said Miss Tick. She sighed. They probably think she cooked him in the oven or something. They never actually said, said Tiffany, but I think it was something like that, yes. And did his horse turn up, said Miss Tick. No, said Tiffany, and that was strange, because if it had turned up anywhere along the hills, the people would have noticed it. Miss Tick folded her hands, sniffed, and smiled a smile with no humour in it at all.